Welcome to Stories from the Shadows, haunted tales from the golden age of ghost stories and supernatural fiction. I'm Ordell, reading Brood of the Witch Queen by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 11, Cairo. The exact manner in which mental stress will affect a man's physical health is often difficult to predict. Robert Cairn was in the pink of condition at the time that he left Oxford to take up his London appointment, but the tremendous nervous strain wrought upon him by this series of events wholly outside the radius of normal things had broken him up physically, where it might have left unscathed a more highly strung though less physically vigorous man. Those who have passed through a nerve storm such as this, which had laid him low, will know that convalescence seems like a welcome awakening from a dreadful dream. It was indeed in a state between awaking and dreaming that Robert Cairn took counsel with his father, the latter more pale than was his wont and somewhat anxious-eyed, and determined upon an Egyptian rest cure. "I've made it all right at the office, Rob," said Dr. Cairn. "In 3 weeks or so you will receive instructions at Cairo to write up a series of local articles. Until then, my boy, complete rest, and don't worry. Above all, don't worry. You and I have passed through a saturnalia of horror, and you, less inured to horrors than I, have gone down, I don't wonder." "Where's Antony Ferreira?" Dr. Cairn shook his head, and his eyes gleamed with a sudden anger. "For God's sake, don't mention his name," he said. "That topic is taboo, Rob. I may tell you, however, that he has left England." In this unreal frame of mind, then, and as one but partly belonging to the world of things actual, Cairn found himself an invalid, who but yesterday had been a hale man, found himself shipped for Port Said, found himself entrained for Cairo, and with an awakening to the realities of life, and emerging from an ill dream to lively interest in the novelties of Egypt, found himself following the red-jerseyed shepherd's porter along the corridor of the train and on out to the platform. A short drive through these singular streets, where east meets west and mingles in the sudden violet dusk of Lower Egypt, and he was amid the bustle of the popular hotel. Syme was there, whom he had last seen at Oxford. Syme the phlegmatic. He apologized for not meeting the train, but explained that his duties had rendered it impossible. Syme was attached temporarily to an archaeological expedition as medical man, and his athletic and somewhat bovine appearance contrasted oddly with the unhealthy gauntness of Cairn. "I only got in from Worcester 10 minutes ago, Cairn. You must come out to the camp when I return. The desert air will put you on your feet again in no time." Syme was unemotional, but there was concern in his voice and in his glance, for the change in Cairn was very startling. Although he knew something, if but very little, of certain happenings in London, gruesome happenings centering around the man called Antony Ferreira, he avoided any reference to them at the moment. Seated upon the terrace, Robert Cairn studied the busy life in the street below with all the interest of a new arrival in the capital of the Near East. More than ever now, his illness and the things which had led up to it seemed to belong to a remote dream existence. Through the railings at his feet, a hawker was thrusting fly whisks and imploring him in complicated English to purchase one. Vendors of beads, of fictitious antiques, of sweetmeats, of what-not, fortune-tellers, and all that chattering horde which some obscure process of gravitation seems to hurl against the terrace of shepherds buzzed about him. Carriages and motor cars, camels and donkeys mingled in the Sharia Kamel Pasha. Voices American, voices Anglo-Saxon, guttural German tones, and softly murmured Arabic merged into one indescribable chord of sound. But to Robert Cairn it was all unspeakably restful. He was quite contented to sit there sipping his whiskey and soda and smoking his pipe. Sheer idleness was good for him and exactly what he wanted. And idling amid that unique throng is idleness deluxe. Syme watched him covertly and saw that his face had acquired lines, lines which told of the fires through which he had passed. Something, it was evident, something horrible, had seared his mind. Considering the many indications of tremendous nervous disaster in Cairn, Syme wondered how near his companion had come to insanity, and concluded that he had stood upon the frontiers of that grim land of phantoms, and had only been plucked back in the 11th hour. Cairn glanced around with a smile from the group of hawkers who solicited his attention upon the pavement below. "This is a delightful scene," he said. "I could sit here for hours, but considering that it's some time after sunset, it remains unusually hot, doesn't it?" "Rather," replied Syme. "They are expecting Khamsin, the hot wind, you know. I was up the river a week ago and we struck it badly in Aswan. It grew as black as night and one couldn't breathe for sand. It's probably working down to Cairo." "From your description, I am not anxious to make the acquaintance of Khamsin." Syme shook his head, knocking out his pipe into the ashtray. "This is a funny country," he said reflectively. "The most weird ideas prevail here to this day. Ideas which properly belong to the Middle Ages. For instance," he began to recharge the hot bowl, "it is not really time for Khamsin. Consequently, the natives feel called upon to hunt up some explanation of its unexpected appearance. Their ideas on the subject are interesting, if idiotic. One of our Arabs, who are excavating in the Fayoum, you know, solemnly assured me yesterday that the hot wind had been caused by an Ifrit, a sort of Arabian Nights demon who has arrived in Egypt." He laughed gruffly, but Cairn was staring at him with a curious expression. Syme continued. "And when I had got to Cairo this evening, I found news of the Ifrit had preceded me. Honestly, Cairn, it's all over the town, the native town, I mean. All the shopkeepers in the Mushki are talking about it. If a puff of Khamsin should come, I believe they would permanently shut up shop and hide in their cellars, if they have any. I'm rather hazy on modern Egyptian architecture." Cairn nodded his head absently. "You laugh," he said, "but the active force of a superstition, what we call a superstition, is sometimes a terrible thing." Syme stared. "Eh?" The medical man had suddenly come uppermost. He recollected that this class of discussion was probably taboo. "You may doubt the existence of Ifrits," continued Cairn, "but neither you nor I can doubt the creative power of thought. If a trained hypnotist, by sheer concentration, can persuade his subject that the latter sits upon the brink of a river fishing, when actually he sits upon a platform in a lecture room, what result should you expect from a concentration of thousands of native minds upon the idea that an Ifrit is visiting Egypt?" Syme stared, in a dull way peculiar to him. "Rather a poser," he said. "I have a glimmer of a notion what you mean." "Don't you think—" "If you mean don't I think the result would be the creation of an Efreet, no, I don't." "I hardly mean that either," replied Cairn, "but this wave of superstition cannot be entirely unproductive. All that thought energy directed to one point." Syme stood up. "We shall get out of our depth," he replied conclusively. He considered the ground of discussion an unhealthy one. This was the territory adjoining that of insanity. A fortune-teller from India proffered his services incessantly. Imshi," growled Syme. "Hold on," said Cairn, smiling. "This chap is not an Egyptian. Let us ask him if he has heard the rumor respecting the Efreet." Syme reseated himself rather unwillingly. The fortune-teller spread his little carpet and knelt down in order to read the palm of his hypothetical client, but Cairn waved him aside. "I don't want my fortune told," he said, "but I will give you your fee," with a smile at Syme, "for a few minutes' conversation." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." The Indian was all attention. "Why," Cairn pointed forensically at the fortune-teller, "why is Khamsin come so early this year?" The Indian spread his hands, palms upward. "How should I know?" he replied in his soft, melodious voice. "I am not of Egypt. I can only say what is told to me by the Egyptians." "And what is told to you?" Syme rested his hands upon his knees, bending forward curiously. He was palpably anxious that Cairn should have confirmation of the Efreet story from the Indian. "They tell me, sir," the man's voice sank musically low, "that a thing very evil—" He tapped a long brown finger upon his breast. "Not as I am." He tapped Syme upon the knee. "Not as he, your friend." He thrust the long finger at Cairn. "Not as you, sir, not a man at all, though something like a man, not having any father and mother." "You mean," suggested Syme, "a spirit?" The fortune-teller shook his head. "They tell me, sir, not a spirit, a man, but not as other men, a very, very bad man, one that the great king, long, long ago, the king you call wise—" "Solomon?" suggested Cairn. "Yes, yes, Suleiman. One that he, when he banished all the tribe of demons from the earth, one that he not found." "When he overlooked?" jerked Syme. "Yes, yes, overlook. A very evil man, my gentleman. And they tell me he has come to Egypt. He come not from the sea, but across the great desert." "The Libyan desert?" suggested Syme. The man shook his head, seeking for words. "The Arabian desert?" "No, no, away beyond, far up in Africa." He waved his long arms dramatically. "Far, far up beyond the Sudan." "The Sahara Desert," proposed Syme. "Yes, yes, it is the Sahara Desert. Come across the Sahara Desert and has come to Khartoum." "How did he get here?" asked Cairn. The Indian shrugged his shoulders. "I cannot say, but next he come to Wadi Haifa, then he is in Aswan, and from Aswan he come down to Luxor. Yesterday an Egyptian friend told me Khamsin is in the Fayoum. Therefore, he is there the man of evil, for he bring the hot wind with him." The Indian was growing impressive, and the two American tourists stopped to listen to his words. "Tonight Tomorrow? He spoke now almost in a whisper, glancing about him as if apprehensive of being overheard. He may be here in Cairo, bringing with him the scorching breath of the desert, the scorpion wind. He stood up, casting off the mystery with which he had invested his story, and smiling insinuatingly. His work was done, his fee was due. Syme rewarded him with 5 piastres, and he departed, bowing. You know, Syme, Cairn began to speak, staring absently the while after the fortune-teller, as he descended the carpeted steps and rejoined the throng on the sidewalk below. You know, if a man, anyone, could take advantage of such a wave of thought as this, which is now sweeping through Egypt, if he could cause it to concentrate upon him, as it were, don't you think that it would enable him to transcend the normal, to do phenomenal things? And by what process should you propose to make yourself such a focus? I was speaking impersonally, Syme. It might be possible. It might be possible to dress for dinner, snapped Syme, if we shut up talking nonsense. There's a carnival here tonight. Great fun. Suppose we concentrate our brain waves on another scotch and soda. Join me next time on Stories from the Shadows for more Egyptian enigmas in Brood of the Witch Queen by Sax Rohmer. Until then, I wouldn't blame you if you leave the lights on.